She was an ordinary girl. She loved and she was loved. And it would seem that what else is needed? But this girl happened to live in a time when love was now devoid of romance, generosity and surprises. To put it simply, it was devoid of magic. You wonder why? Well, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, magical fairies that used to grace the world around us with all the fabulous atmosphere so necessary for loving hearts, now deprive us of their magic. Now each one of the fairies lived on their own, wrapping their hearts in pride and smugness. The fairies could not decide which one of them was more important and superior, and they could not come to anything except quarrels that separated them for many years. And that's how people have lived on earth ever since. No matter how much they wanted to love and please each other, all their efforts and hopes crumbled against the rocks of great days. But our heroine was not in haste to despair, because she knew that her love and the love of her chosen one for her will not only live and prosper, but will also help others find their soulmate. And so our brave heroine decided to go on a journey to a distant fairy tale town, hoping to find each of fairies and reconcile their hearts. The path consisted of ancient streets and alleys filled with incredible beauty. Meanwhile, on one of these streets there was a fabulous house hidden behind the dense branches of a fir tree, and in which, surrounded by plush toys and wooden figures, lived a toy fairy. Sad and gloomy, the fairy sorted through the toys, shifting them from shelf to shelf, from basket to basket, as if someone needed them except herself. And then the fairy saw our heroine coming into her house, approaching the fairy, whispering something in her ear and holding out a magic wand with a heart on its peak. The fairy, delighted with what she had heard, accepted the gift and gave one in return. The gift was a plush toy that people used to like to give each other on Valentine's Day. After picking up the first of the symbols of the holiday, the heroine continued her way along the fabulous streets and alleys, and suddenly saw a girl sitting alone on the street, and with sadness in her eyes playing with a red ribbon. The girl was a bow fairy. The heroine whispered something in her ear, giving the fairy the same heart that went to the first fairy she met. And now the magical phrase that the girl whispered to the fairies made them believe that they were not forgotten, and that not a single soul who dreamed of love and romance on Valentine's Day could receive it without their magical powers. After leaving the bow fairy, our heroine continued her search, and before she could turn the corner, she saw another dreary fairy piercing everything around her with her gloomy gaze, and especially a diamond ring in the box, a symbol of two loving hearts who decided to put their destinies into one. The diamond fairy, as if frozen in time but continuing to shine with her diamond tiara, suddenly noticed a girl who was already leaning towards her to say those kind words which had already warmed and inspired her other fairy friends. After hearing them and receiving the cherished heart wand, the diamond fairy smiled and realized that now her diamond ring is finally useful to someone. But it's not her who should give it to the girl, but the one who asked for her hand in marriage. Therefore, the fairy decided to save the ring for later. While the diamond fairy was thinking about all that, our heroine had already stepped towards the overgrown building on which a house with a bright dome was being erected, symmetrically open like a curtain, which barely covered the door with an inviting look. In this house, everything was strewn with sweets and marshmallows, sweet frosting and caramel lollipops, and from behind them a girl in a fluffy white dress resembling those very candies could be seen. It was the Marshmallow Fairy. And there is no need to mention that there was no joy or delight on her face, but only a longing and tired, dull look. And although the doors of the fairy's house looked welcoming, she herself clearly did not expect the arrival of guests. But still, when she met a stranger girl who had already crossed the threshold of her house, the fairy looked around curiously. And so, having received the very wand with a heart that our heroine has generously given away to the fairies, and listening to her words, there was no trace of longing on the marshmallow fairy's face anymore. But this was not the only bouquet that the heroine managed to collect, because finally she visited a fairy whose bright symbol would not leave anyone indifferent, and of course, this was Rose Fairy. And the girl found her in a flower house where the silhouette of a fairy was barely visible, surrounded by colorful roses falling over her body. Intoxicated by scent, the wanderer stepped closer to the fairy, holding out the last of the magic wands with a heart on top, and with glee in her eyes, the fairy gathered a delicate bouquet of fresh roses, not yet touched by human hand, and gave it to the girl. Pleased with herself and anticipating the joy of the holiday that was about to envelop the earth in magic of love, our brave heroine was already on her way from the fabulous city of fairies, when suddenly, as if in a dream, she found herself in an unfamiliar place. A girl appeared out of nowhere, though not distracted from her chores. She was sitting at a typewriter, creating more and more valentines. Who was it, you ask? That was a date fairy. And how did it happen that the wanderer almost forgot about her? After all, without fairy charms, there would have been no way for lovers to meet and please each other with gifts. But Date Fairy had already heard about some guests walking around the city collecting holiday symbols, so the fairy was already waiting for her at her residence. And she wasn't there alone, but with her beloved sister, with who they tirelessly printed little valentines, writing invitations on them. And so there were two sisters who completed each other and embodied tenderness and passion, patience and perseverance, thrill and attraction. So all the symbols of Valentine's Day were collected. The fairies finally reconciled, and the holiday was filled with magic again, giving people the love and romance they needed so much on this day. And so, my dear reader, how it happens in the world. Once upon a time, an ordinary girl who had a hope to find her happiness dared to take matters in her own hands and let you and me understand that only true, all-encompassing love doesn't tolerate pride, and that only together we can give each other magic. But what about a happy ending for the heroine herself? Upon returning home, she was met by her lover, who, as it turned out later, was looking for her all the time that the girl was wandering around the fabulous city collecting pieces of magic for Valentine's Day. But her lover didn't meet her empty-handed, but with a diamond ring that shone with a dazzling light, and which the girl had been waiting for so long. But what was that magical phrase that the girl whispered to all the fairies, warming their hearts? Well, I guess we'll never know. But one thing I know for sure, words spoken with love will not go unheard.